Albert Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself." Sometimes technology makes us feel like 6-year-olds, especially when hackers try to use the internet to steal something from each of us. If you think you have nothing of value to a hacker, think again. You and everyone you know are exactly who hackers target every day. This is DIY Cyber Guy with David W. Schrofer. Every week, he will show you how cybersecurity can be as easy as locking up your house at night. Now, here is your host, David W. Schrofer.
Welcome, everybody, to DIY Cyber Guy. Now, there's some really interesting ways that hackers are going after your data and your money, your Bitcoin, your identity, and this show gives you easy-to-understand, step-by-step guides to avoiding these hacks and protecting yourselves and your children online. And it's never been easier to listen to our show. You can watch us on our new YouTube channel, or you can download our free podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and now we're on Spotify. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can find DIY Cyber Guy. And please, if you like what you see here, subscribe wherever you see our show. And if you need to reach me, just leave a comment exactly here where you're seeing our show, or reach out to me at questions@DIY Cyber Guy. So on with the show. Now, this is a hair on fire 1 out of 5. There's not really a lot of action that I need you to take on this particular item, but it's really important that you know about it and tap into the lessons that we've learned from this particular attack. And I'm talking about a recent Department of Justice filing against 9 Iranian hackers that you probably read about in the news. Now, this was a pretty massive attack by a fairly small group of people that weren't necessarily using very sophisticated tools and tricks. They were just very well funded, and they had the ability to take advantage of vulnerabilities into some systems. So these hackers were able to attack 144 U.S. universities, 176 other universities outside of the U.S. Roughly 8,000 professors were compromised, and think of the magnitude of that. They were also able to hit the United Nations, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the guys who keep an eye on all of our power grids in the U.S., something substantial there, and also the U.S. states of Hawaii and Indiana. This was not a small scale or a amateur hour hack that was happening here. The DOJ says these hackers stole 31 terabytes worth of data, worth about $3 billion in intellectual property. Now, importantly, this was classified as state-sponsored terrorism, meaning that Iran, the government of Iran, actually sponsored or helped finance what's called the Mabna Institute, which served as a contractor for the Iranian government and was responsible for these hacks, the DOJ alleges. Now, I'm going to put a link in the show notes that'll allow you to see a little bit more about this, but fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. How do we learn from fighting things as sophisticated as state-sponsored terrorism? So with me to talk about that is Peter Clay. Peter is an internationally experienced cybersecurity executive. He has 23 years of service to the world's largest private and public sector entities, and he's worked for the legislative and executive branches of the United States government. Welcome, Peter.
David, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
So what did we learn first and foremost about this hack from the Iranian hackers?
That it all started pretty much with public information. What they did was they went out, and it's a technique called spraying for the most part, and they just simply go out and typically in an automated way, they gather as many email addresses as they can. Their initial target pool started with something around 145,000 different email addresses.
Okay.
And where they really started to do the damage was they were able to hook about 8,000 of those 144,000 with a really simple phishing attack. And
okay.
for your users, a phishing attack is just if I craft an email that looks really good to you and get you to click on it and give me information that's useful to me, then I have just hooked a fish. There's also a variation called spear phishing, where I go in and look up I get your email address and then look up information about you from public sources and really start to craft that email address so that you're more likely to hook on it.
Okay, so they started with publicly available information. They ended up with a list of email addresses, and they sent what sounds like a typical phishing attack, which we have covered many times in the show. I've said it over and over again. I'll say it again now. If you don't know the source of your email, or even if you think you do know the source of your email, it looks like a friend or it looks like a colleague, and it has a link in it that you didn't expect, take the 3 seconds it takes to send an out of band message. If you get an email, send them a text or even give them a phone call, you know, that voice mechanism that we still sometimes use. But just send an out of band text message or something and just say, hey, did you just send me this link? It looks a little odd. And wait for them to reply and say, yeah, that was me. I wanted to share a picture of my dog or whatever it might be. But it makes a lot of sense to not click that link until you're sure that the sender intended to send it. So let's start with the public information, Peter. Where did they manage to get all those email addresses?
It's really simple. They can do screen scraping and just start to, if your email address, or if you published an email address, Peter Clay at company.com.
Mm-hmm.
If you publish that email address, anybody can access it, pull it down, and start to work on it. What they do after they get the email address is they just start trying random passwords and in hopes of actually getting in to grab the email address, or they start sending you the phishing emails to try to get you to give them the information that way. Either way, what they're looking for is your credentials. That's the really valuable piece of data that they're looking for first.
Now, usually when we talk about credentials in this show, we're talking about a username and password. But in this case, you're expanding that definition a little bit to include just an email address, because that can be used as an attack surface.
Absolutely.
By a hacker. Okay.
Yeah, just me knowing a personal email address, if you think about it, gives me half of what I need to conduct a successful penetration of your email account. All I need after that is the password.
One easy way to do that, so instead of writing, for example, David at company.com and publishing that on a website, an easy way to keep or to make it a little bit harder on the hackers is doing this pretty simple trick. Instead of using the @ sign in your email address, just use open bracket, AT, close bracket. Now, a sophisticated tool can look for this pattern also, but it's an easy way to make it just a little bit harder on the hackers. Peter, what do you think about that method as one way to make it a little bit harder?
I think that's an absolutely fantastic method. Another way that works really well with that is, instead of putting David out there at all, just put info@company.com and manage it internally. Either one of those will work.
Yeah.
Those approaches take away the attacker's advantage in leveraging what we're trying to do for business, and put the control back where it belongs with the organization or company. A couple things that, when we started really looking at this problem, we always think about cybersecurity as the big company or big organization problem.
Right.
And what we've really found is, from study after study after study, is about 58% of all cyber attacks target small businesses or individuals.
58%.
58% of the targeted attacks, not people that just scan the internet, but people that are looking for, David at, and going after them that way. Because what they're finding is small businesses, another study said 14% of small businesses rate their ability to mitigate cyber risks as highly effective. The other 86% of the small businesses, the vast majority of them were not doing much, if anything, to protect against cyber attacks. So even when you're talking about protecting really sensitive information like we were in this attack that we're talking about, when you start looking at higher education, you're talking about billions of dollars of financial records from students and parents. You're talking about payroll systems. You're talking, in a lot of cases, about health records for people, all of which are between $6 and $12 per record. were between $6 and $12 per record on the internet,
On the
on the dark web.
on the
Sorry.
dark web, the illegal part
Yeah.
of the internet. Yeah.
The interesting part, the part where you don't go without a lot of protection.
Yes.
What we're driving to here is this isn't a big company problem, right? The same methods that are being used here, phishing and hacking and those sorts of things, get used all the time against small companies and small businesses. If you look as a percentage of attacks right now from some really reputable sources, much higher up on the list than anybody ever expected, for example, are law firms. Hackers are really driving after law firms at the moment, and we just worked with one that unfortunately got hit with ransomware, which locked up their systems and caused some significant problems.
And out of curiosity, just to give a little context, are we talking about a 3,000 employee law firm or something smaller than that?
Oh, we were talking about a 10-person law firm.
A 10-person law firm.
Absolutely.
So let me stop there for 1 second, because a lot of times I hear from my listeners that they don't think they're a target because they're simply too small. Why not go after the 3,000 employee law firm and get all of the riches of information that they have in there instead of a 10-person law firm? Because what could they possibly have? And I hear that from law firm owners and flower shop owners and even people that run their own networks at home all the time. And I think a fundamental tenet of this show is telling people that, yeah, you can be a target. So why was this 10-person law firm considered a target by these hackers?
Simply because of who they did work for. We were able to trace it back that this company specialized in a specific brand of law, and their name was mentioned in public filings as being associated with some very wealthy individuals, as well as some Fortune 500 companies. And so these 10 people with their very specialized information became the victim of a very, very targeted attack. And the interesting part was, once we got in there and started looking at it, it wasn't just the ransomware. That was almost kind of the incidental attack. We found evidence of attempted intrusions and potentially activated intrusions that reach back over a couple of years. Data is the new gold rush in our economy. Data has value. And so when you use it, and I understand completely, because when I came from working for huge entities and started working for small to mid-sized businesses and becoming the chief information security officer for a couple of them, my question was always, okay, well, now that I'm not trying to secure, petabytes of data on 4 continents and all the rest, this is going to get easier, right?
Right.
What you find is you got the same problems, you just don't even have a tenth of the resources necessary to even start to address them. And so all the same laws apply to you, all the same requirements, all the same standards, but you have to really start getting better by understanding the value of the data that you have.
I think it's important for listeners to understand the downside of not doing some of the things that we talk about on the show. So in terms that you can disclose on a podcast, what was the pain that this law firm experienced after it was clear that the intrusion may have been happening over a long period of time, that data that they thought was safe was in fact not safe and possibly in the hands of somebody else? Did they have to go to all those clients and say, hey, all that personal data, all that detailed data might actually be out there on the dark web, we don't know?
From an IBM-sponsored Ponemon Institute study, what we do know is 60% of small companies that suffer a breach go out of business within 6 months.
Say that statistic again, please. That was
60%
incredible.
of small businesses that suffer a breach go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack.
What's the cause and effect? Draw a straight line between the breach and the company going out of business. What are the dominoes that fall in between there?
Several different things. Number one, loss of reputation. The impact on even the company I talked about before was dramatic and drastic. Um, when you're a small to mid-sized business, and I'm talking about businesses that can even go up to 1,000 people or more, the loss of reputation, the loss of the ability to service your clients for a period of time has enormous ripple impacts on the company. Number two, try winning additional work where you deal with another company's sensitive data
Right.
after you've had a public breach. Number three, the cost of the breach, even if you have some form of cyber insurance, which could be a whole other show, but even if you have that, you still have a tremendous amount of legal costs, court costs, and just trying to buy, if you're a company that is working with clients and you've lost control of their information, buying credit monitoring services for all of your clients potentially.
Right.
Bringing in incident response specialists can run into the tens of thousands of dollars. Dealing with the lawsuits and the legal bills that go along with this, all of that mounts up. It's all an unplanned expense. And a great many of these small businesses just don't have the resources to manage all of that. Plus, they
So,
do the wrong thing.
right.
They don't get help early. So it's not just the breach and being broken into, it's how you handle all these processes out the other side
Yep.
that really determines success or failure.
Let's talk about that first step. I certainly hope that none of my listeners are in the same boat as the law firm that you talked about, or any of these universities that we've been talking about. But if you are a small business owner and you bump into just evidence that you've been hacked, your network is, well, let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, what is the evidence that you would see, or what would a typical user of a system see that would give them a clue that maybe they have been hacked? And what should that very first phone call be?
Well, first of all, in a lot of cases, there are now several federal and state entities that are discovering hacks in the course of law enforcement activities or security intelligence functions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, having been the recipient of calls from these agencies, hope that you don't get a call from a law enforcement agency saying, "Hey, we think you've been hacked." That's
Okay.
not a great day to start. That's not a great way to start your day.
Yeah.
The
So that's method number one. If your phone rings and it's a law enforcement agent on the other end saying that you might have been hacked, that's one way to find out. But what's
make sure that it is a law enforcement agent on the other end. Going
well,
back to the
yeah,
original premise,
yeah,
your computer starts running slow. People start responding to emails kind of out of turn or out of sync. Wait a minute, why are you sending me this information? People, you start to see if your email's been hacked, people will start to respond to you going, "Pete, why are you sending me a link for a Maserati in Italy? I don't understand what's going on." That's a great tip. You'll start getting phone calls from family and friends. What's happening there?
yeah.
Your internet connection starts running really slowly. Bank numbers don't add up. Balance your checkbook. It's a really good security control.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to your bank. Make sure that there are limits on who can access information and what they can do to your bank account. But it really comes down to, if you're running your business and it just feels wrong, if it feels bad, something is out of place and you don't know what it is, stop what you're doing until you figure it out. Look at your malware logs, look at your computer logs, or have somebody look at them for you.
So the first step would be to the system administrator, who can look at logs, assuming that they've been set up.
Yeah. Look at the logs. Am I talking to Russia at 3 o'clock in the morning every day.
And when you say talking to, meaning is one of my computers sending information or requesting information from a website or sending any other information to the country of Russia? Not,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Or something that's out of the ordinary. Why would I
right,
be making this connection to Belize at 2 o'clock in the morning?
right.
Let's find that out and let's figure that out.
You know, we touched on something there that we haven't talked about before. Proactively, if I'm that small business owner and I'm not a system administrator, but I've got one, you know, a lot of the small companies have hire one company that is the sysadmin for 50 small businesses, right? So what kinds of questions you mentioned error logs. What kinds of questions can I as a business owner ask my sysadmin, whether it's outsourced or in-house, just to make sure that they are on top of things? Like question number one that you just mentioned, hey, are we keeping error logs? And you know, how often do we review them? That might be a great place to start with your sysadmin just to make sure they're on top of it. But what other kinds of things should a CEO just ask, or anybody just ask of their sysadmin to make sure that that guy's or that company is doing their job and ready to tell you if there's a problem in the network before you have to find out the hard way, like you've been talking about, which is your network getting starting to act funny or your phone ringing with a law enforcement agent on the other end?
A couple of things come to mind every time. And there was a study out of the University of Maryland that rated the best return on investment for your cybersecurity dollar. So I'll come back to the question you asked, but I do want to get this in because I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Before you buy a firewall, before you buy a lot of other three-letter acronyms, IDS, IPS, DLP, all of those things, the very best return on investment that you have for your security dollar is to train your employees on what to look for and how to protect information. And the good thing is a tremendous amount of that training is now free. You can just go on the internet. Udemy has some great tools out there. You can go, you can log in at maybe even a couple bucks, but you can actually get your employees to take that training and then have them understand it.
Could you repeat the name of the training company you mentioned a second ago?
It's an online training company. It's called udemy.com.
udemy.com. And
Yep.
for listeners, I will have these links in the show notes. So just go to DIYcyberguy.com and look for the show notes under this episode, and you'll see udemy.com and every other link we've been talking about so far.
Then start to work with your sysadmin. Are you looking at the error logs? Are you looking at the number of email accounts? Do I have 10 employees, but I have 15 email accounts? Who are the other 5 people?
Right.
Why are those out of order or why are those out of line? Are you running vulnerability scan? After phishing, which we've already talked about, the next critical thing to do as that small business is to patch your machines. How frequently does your sysadmin patch the machine? How frequently do they do a very straightforward, simple vulnerability scan? Those things tell you what an attacker would see when they're coming at you. If you're using a product from Symantec or Malwarebytes or McAfee or any of those companies, there's a tremendous amount of security intelligence that comes behind those things. So they aggregate a lot of information from other people that have been hacked and pull that in to give you the best possible product that they can. But they also make a lot of that information available to you. So start, is your sysadmin going to those sites and saying, these are the well-known phishing sites, watering hole attacks, and those sorts of things, and putting a block in at the firewall that simply won't let your folks go to those sites. So all of that's free, and you haven't really spent any money yet.
And on that topic, just to for the listeners who've been with me a while, we have talked about what we're talking about. That last point was DNS registry and being able to use a DNS blocker so your computers can't go to a site that is known to be bad. And we've mentioned a couple of you mentioned that there are free sites out there. There's certainly Quad9 which is 9. The IP address is 9.9.9.9. And you can go to quad9.com and learn for yourself how to turn that on. Also, Cloudflare also has a great one, which is 1.1.1.1. And we've talked about this in episodes before, but that's just one of the things you said if you're a business owner and you're talking to your sysadmin. So let me run through that list and just kind of recap what you just said, because these are fantastic points. Ask your sysadmin, are we keeping error logs? How often are those error logs looked at? How frequently does the sysadmin patch or run updates on the computers that are running on the network? The number of email accounts. How many email accounts does the company have, and who does it match the number of employees that the company has? If not, what's the difference? Vulnerability scans. How often do they run those types of scans? And what we just talked about, which is blocking. How do we automatically block our computers from even reaching out to sites that are known to be bad? Those are absolutely fantastic points, and I would encourage everybody who uses a sysadmin, if you're not your own sysadmin, to go ask those questions today to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And just to kind of finish that off, and when you start with information security, you'll see that you need to do risk assessments and security maturity models and all of these different documents and plans and policies and procedures and all the rest of this stuff. And all of that certainly has a place. But the one that you actually have to pay attention to and you have to live with and do is your incident response plan.
Okay.
In almost every case that you look at, whether it's the hack that we're talking about or any other hack, the language that you have to remember is speed kills problems. The faster you detect something, the faster you respond to it, the better outcome your company or organization is going to have.
So the sysadmin should have that incident response plan. And even if it's a page, even if it's just step 1, pick up the phone, dial this number, or whatever the case may be. And if that person's not available, here are the next 3 people to call. It can be a simple thing. It doesn't have to be a whole binder full of information. But that plan should exist. And the sysadmin of any company, large or small, should have that.
Absolutely. And you took the words right out of my mouth. The one-page plan, even if it's not perfect, is infinitely better than the 20-page plan that nobody's ever read. Yeah. Right? The only parts of an incident response plan that absolutely have to be there is who's in charge in the event of an incident and what do you want them to do. And if you have those things in place, you have an effective incident response plan, and then take advantage of the tools that you have. Those things help keep you out of that 60% of small businesses that don't survive a major breach or incident.
So, Peter, that's incredibly helpful information. I really appreciate you sharing the step-by-step guide of how business owners can talk to their sysadmins. Incredibly valuable stuff. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
You can find us in 2 different places. Number 1, I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in the LinkedIn URL, and then PE Clay will take you right to my profile, and you'll see all my musings and ruminations that go back over a couple years now. The second thing is we're launching a free-to-use, free of charge, no cost to anything on the site, website called cyberops.com. And what's going to be there are the basic planning tools, things like the incident response plan we just talked about, just guides that will help you think through this and go through this without having to hire a consultant or use a consultant, as well as links to free tools, free services, free information about cyber that's all geared to small to mid-sized businesses. We're trying to help you fill in that gap between you have all of these requirements to meet, but not the resources of the massive companies. So we're helping fill in some parts of that gap.
That's fantastic. Again, for my listeners, I will have all those links in the show notes. Congratulations on the launch of your new site. That was cyberops.com, and I would certainly encourage everybody to go there. So, Peter, thanks a million for being on the show. It was really great having you.
David, thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate it. And you've gained more avid followers here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. So that's all the time we have. Remember, we have a free ebook up on our website. That's DIYcyberguy.com/free. You can also send your questions, although we didn't get to any today, at questions@DIYcyberguy.com. And again, it's never been easier to listen. You can download our free podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player.fm, Stitcher, Overcast, Listen Notes, and also Spotify. And remember, you can buy my book, Digital Habits, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or just search Digital Habits 5 on Google. So thanks for listening. And to remind you of a quote that a recent guest gave me, Dr. Meyer Rose, he said, cybersecurity is something you do. It is not something you buy. So I hope this episode helped you to see how easy cybersecurity is to do to keep yourself safe online. Thanks for listening, and come back for our next show.
Thank you for listening to DIY Cyber Guy. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this broadcast are for general information only, and we have not knowingly divulged any information that would conflict with any of our non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. Enjoy the internet safely.